Welcome to the church. My name is Sarah Cochran. I am Chief Curator here at the church, and it was my enormous pleasure to co-curate this exhibition with Eric Fischel, who is sitting over there. By choice, as usual.
Can someone please move forward and sit next to Eric, please? She's like, what am I, chopped liver?
You can tell we're a wee bit punch drunk. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We are excited to have Zöe Buckman here in the show with, her piece upstairs, and here on the dais with me. The organization for this evening is a conversation. And then there will be time for questions afterwards. So I will sit down and get things started. But if I may ask you to silence your cell phones, I would be very grateful. Thank you. Okay. Do you have your water?
I do. Oh, God, I'm loud. I'm going to hold this down here.
So obviously, Zöe, you have been interested in, your work has centered around issues of women's rights, violence against women. Your piece upstairs is very beautiful and very impactful. Why don't you describe it, perhaps talk a little bit about how you came to make it and what that piece feels like now with the reality of the Supreme Court decision on Roe versus Wade a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, by the way. This is a real honor to be included in the show and to be, in conversation with you and with such amazing artists. And also some of my favorite people in all of New York are here, and that's just really beautiful. Okay, so the piece is called Champion, and I made it in 2016. Which we all remember what was going on then. On a personal level, I was gearing up for divorce, and so there was a lot of fighting going on. Not literal, not in that relationship, not literal, but yeah, good guy. But still, I was gearing up to enter this struggle, toe to toe. And on the outside, I just felt like there was so much fighting. There was a shooting at Planned Parenthood that no one gave a shit about. And very few people gave a shit about it. And then as every election cycle here in America, because I've lived here for like 15 years, each time it always completely floors me that we have to endure all of these statements about abortion and our bodies and our rights made by old, white, politicians, men, straight men, and they start talking about our bodies, and which always then invariably leads to a conversation about rape, and then offensively rape, or like the scale of rape, and it's amazing. And if you are someone who has personal experience of these things, of violence, of sexual assault, of abortion, or anything gynecological or obstetric, and I have experience of all of those things, it's a really, really hard time. So I started boxing, and it was, boxing was so, I know that this is, like, we can put a pin in it, I can keep talking.
No,
okay, cool, bless you. Boxing was so formative for me for so many reasons, and in no particular order, just thinking about it now, there was the fact that I grew up in a very, very rough neighborhood and violence was everywhere. And there was so much toxic masculinity, and I was adjacent to or directly experienced a lot of aggression and violence. And so I learned how to talk with my words and I'm apparently quite scrappy with my language, but never physically. So the interesting thing about stepping into this boxing gym, which was this downtown Puerto Rican place in Manhattan, was that I was actually really drawn to it. It didn't frighten me. I was like, this is like home. I've missed this. I lived such a pedestrian life, and now here I am in this place where there's this sort of controlled violence. So I can sort of get back in touch with some of that sort of intuitive fight or flight provoking scenarios, but I know I'm safe. And also what was really amazing, and Eric touched on this, is that, well, for me, like, you get your ass handed to you. Like, it's very humbling. Like, I started training and I knew, like, I'm never going to be good at this. I will never excel at this, and I can really improve, and I tried so hard. And a lot of what I was learning was how to be awake and alert. So almost like the opposite of like a yoga practice, I guess. It's like you have to be so in your body and so on guard. And I was learning, as a woman entering this male-dominated industry, I was learning how to like protect my space, hold my own, even take space away from other people, which I wasn't really comfortable with. So yeah, as you can hear, boxing was really amazing to me, and I knew it would end up in my practice at some point, but I didn't know how. But I'm constantly in my like gym bag. I've got my gloves and my wraps and a mouth guard, which I never wore. I hated it. It was very gaggy. But I had a particularly grueling time training and sparring one morning, and I went to my studio. And I just sat and I meditated, actually. And I was thinking about another thing you've touched on, which is the difference between being a victim and being a survivor. And I think that both are really important. And I think that there's this pressure sometimes on women or femme-bodied people that, like, when something happens, you have to be a survivor. You have to be a survivor. You can't be a victim. And actually, sometimes you need to be a victim and then be a survivor, or sometimes it changes day to day. But I was meditating and I saw this neon glowing uterus in my mind, and in place of the ovaries, there was boxing gloves. And there it is, champion, thanks to Lavon, which is now here. And the space, the dimensions of it were defined by the fact that I was using my boxing gloves. So I just pinned them onto my studio wall, sketched out in pencil onto the wall the shape of a uterus per, like, you know, what you learn in school, and then had that neon piece made. And people didn't really, I don't think people really cared that much about it at first. And then Hank Willis Thomas, who I know is part of our community and your community, said, I want you to give me that for this show that I'm doing at Jack Shaman Gallery, the first Four Freedoms show. And I said, okay. What about if I take a little bit more space away from other people? What about if I make it pink and I make it three-dimensional? It hangs from the ceiling. And it was actually like a bit more of an annoying piece. It's like really impractical and annoying. But I made that piece. And just to end my soliloquy, a writer, this is knock wood, it's the only time someone's written something horrible about my work. A man reviewed the show, and he was saying really nice things about some of the pieces, and then he said, and then Zöe Buckman's piece screams, "We're still fighting for our rights," quotation marks. I was like, ow, dude, like, you literally never need access. This guy, he's never gonna need access to the healthcare that we need access to. Like, it didn't feel nice. And then the election happened. And then the piece kind of took off, and it was like, boom, they wanted it in Art Basel, and boom, they wanted to put it on the Sunset Strip. And then I was at a party, Baxter Street thing, and this guy came up to me and he said, "You're Zöe Buckman?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm Tom, Dick, and Harry," whatever his name was. He said, I wrote something about your piece. I went,
I hope you hit him.
"It was you." And he was like, "And I am very sorry." So the fact that Trump got elected, he then felt compelled to come up and apologize. And he was like, you are still fighting, and you do need to still fight. And I'm sorry that I wrote that. And I was like, it's all good, man. It's all good. Yeah.
So you mentioned that, you know, the boxing club was a safe space. Casilles, who's one of the artists upstairs, who was a semi-pro boxer, they talk about boxing as consenting violence.
Yes.
And I find that such an interesting and meaty term because, again, it does bring it back to male-female relationships, and also back to consenting sexuality.
Yeah.
And is that something that you knew innately, or was that something that grew as you started to make other pieces centered on boxing gloves or referencing domestic violence?
It grew organically. Like, I think I experienced that the first time I saw a fist swinging for my face. And then I experienced it even more the first time I got punched in the face in the boxing gym. And I would show up at art events with black eye. It was like a sort of 3 to 4 year period of my life where I was obsessed. And so there was some black eyes. And the first time I was punched in the face, it really woke me up. Yeah, and I'm not recommending it, but it puts, I think, these sorts of practices, and I think one of the reasons why so many artists are drawn to boxing is that because it is beautiful, and you have to be agile, and there's like delicacy, and it's a lot to do with holding back, actually, which is what my coach was teaching me. He was like, you're scrappy. And he's like, but you're gonna gas out. Yeah, so he was like, you can't come in, bang, 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 slap, slap, on round 1 or round 2, because you're gonna be finished. So he's like, some people I need to teach them to come in. He's like, you need to learn how to like conserve your energy and like make it work. And so anyway, I'm rambling, but it is an amazing practice, and I think it's also a sport or an art form, or however we look at it, that is mainly for working class, lower income people excel in it because of the streets, and because also you don't need a whole bunch of shit. And so I think that's also why a lot of artists like myself are drawn to it, because we're like there's that familiarity in that environment. Yeah.
So you've talked about what it felt like the first time you took a hit, and this is totally off anything we've talked about, but what did it feel like to hit somebody for the first time?
They had to tell me to stop apologizing. Yeah. They were like, so you can't just stop it, like you don't look mean when you do that. It's like, bam, sorry, oh my God, sorry, bam, oh my God, sorry. They were like, it's not gonna work.
So back onto art. There's so many dichotomies in your work, obviously kind of the soft and the hard, all of these, the feminine and the masculine. How do you keep that kind of fresh, and how do you keep that balance in your studio?
Yeah, I think that what you've hit on is probably like the one thread, pun intended, that runs throughout my whole practice. And it's this idea of these polarized states or concepts, these binaries. But I'm really interested in that intersection, or like if you've got like hard here and you've got soft here, masculine, feminine, or whatever, what is that line in between? And like that's the space that I've always been really drawn to. And I think when I look in my work at hard and soft, masculine and feminine, I'm not talking about our bodies, because I think, it's widely understood that gender is somewhat of a construct, and like for many it is and for many it's not. But I'm really talking about like almost like the yin and yang, and in that way the masculine and the feminine is very real if we look at them as qualities, both as important as each other, but one has been dominating recent times. But that wasn't your question. Your question was, how do I keep that balance in my practice? It's completely, I don't ever think about it, but it's always there, and I feel like everything I make has some hard and some soft in it, and some pain and some ecstasy. No, maybe some more pain than anything else, but yeah, I don't think about it all that much, and I love when other people draw their own insights and contexts into the work. I don't think of, like, I don't have a goal when I make a piece. I had a show in 2019 in New York, and my brother, I have 3 brothers, hence a lot of toxic masculinity. And this brother, he's my favorite now. Like, we're best friends, but he was a real shit. And he was like super, super tough. And it was amazing in some respects having a big brother who was like 6'4", and like he walked around with he'd been beaten up, mugged so many times. He started most of the fights. And it was helpful to have a really violent, aggressive big brother sometimes, and then other times really not. Like, living with that was hard. And he came to my solo show, and he pulled me aside and he was like, I've got to be accountable now, innit? And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, that piece, there was a piece that was in the entrance, which of course is the thing that you see on your way out, and it was a tablecloth, and I had machine embroidered, inaction is apathy, is collusion, is violence. And he was like, that is telling me that I have to do work, and I'm part of the problem. And I was like, it is really wonderful that you see that. And that's on you, and yes, you're right.
So to probe that a little bit more, I mean, do you feel that a certain amount of fear or discomfort in your past has sort of brought you to this point and to the work that you do?
Yeah, 100%. I think there's, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I guess it is what it is, but there's stuff in my past that is very present in the work. But then there's also like more recent things, like grief when I lost my mom, and like abandonments, abortions, miscarriages, like these things, and being in a relationship that was psychologically, physically and sexually violent. Like, that is a lot in the work, and I really hope to have less source material moving forward. But truly, like, I think I'm done. Like, I definitely have enough source material for like a few more shows. But I think that these things happen to us, and they're really shit. And so you might as well draw from them and create from them, and let them be. It sounds really cheesy, but like, I remember hearing that some people have the ability to take the worst thing that happened to them and make it the best thing that happened to them. And I guess I tried to do that. Yeah.
And it would seem to me, I'm sorry, can
No,
I get you a tissue?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
It would seem to me that there is a lot of humor in your work, and that may be one of the ways you work through this and change. I mean, you know, people talk about how humor is a way of bringing down barriers and then feeling and transforming things that have happened to us. Yeah. So you're obviously very conscious of the humor, and here come the tissues.
Oh, bless you, thank you. Appreciate it, thank you. I think you're right, and I think it's a British thing as well, isn't it? We always deflect with a joke and like, ha ha ha, don't take me too seriously, hee hee. But I do think that my work, and also as a person, I am trying to draw people in, and, you know, to talk about confronting things. Like, I want to confront people and I want to challenge, but I don't want to do that in a shouty way. Like, I just personally, and no shade to artists who do, but I personally am more interested in, like, in bringing people closer, and I think humor is one of the ways to do that. And just hearing you say that and seeing some of the slides, I did my first and so far only piece of video art, and it's a 17-minute performance of this actually really long poem that I wrote called Show Me Your Bruises Then. And all of that text up there is from Show Me Your Bruises Then. And most of the text that I use in my work draws from that poem, but I never put it all together, that one too. I never put it all together as a performance. And I was thinking before the pandemic of doing it, and I shot it at home at my mum's kitchen table with Sienna Miller and Kush Jumbo. And there's an embroidery of Kush. And the interesting thing about that shoot, and again, I'd never done it shoot, you know, but the interesting thing is that all of us at some point saying the words were laughing, and then at other points crying. And there was humor in it. And especially those two actors, they're really funny and they really got that and then knew when to like drop into the more serious stuff. Yeah.
Do you think of yourself as a feminist artist?
Yes. I would say, yeah, I guess I feel like I'm an intersectional feminist in that I'm really interested in a feminist movement that is expansive, and also one in which we recognize that, you know, there are other marginalized groups who, as well as being women, have a more intersectional, like an impacted, larger experience of oppression. When those two things, it's like, you know, when you getting punched in the face sucks, and then when you get punched in the face and spat on, like, it really sucks and it's gross. So it's sort of looking at the intersections, and that's the type of feminism that I'm really excited about.
I mean, obviously one of the most visual parts of your work is your engagement with handicrafts. Yeah. And you know, that is obviously something which is sort of identified with women and women's work, perhaps even with craft. I'm interested in how you came to work in that way, and I'm also interested in how much that is content and how much that is form.
Yeah, I think, that's a brilliant question. I think in the way that most artists who use collage, I guess they're not like, I think rarely they would go to an art store and get bits of paper and sort of cut them up, right? They like usually taking from magazines and books and found bits. Mm-hmm. And I'm really drawn to textiles that have lived, and these are more sort of feminine textiles because they're tablecloths, they're doilies, wedding dresses, lingerie. And so I get these into my studio because I feel like they've had a story, and maybe they lived on someone's kitchen table all the time, or maybe they were bought out for special occasions, in which case if they were, you know, if you're a tablecloth that gets bought out for a special occasion, you've probably seen some fights around that table because that's when families usually get into it. But I don't know what the story behind most of these textiles are, and that's quite exciting to me because then I can sort of build my own narratives. It is also textiles, as Tony Ross knows as well, because she does so much weaving. It's like I think when we use these practices, we are kind of like falling in line with a lineage of female makers and artists, and that kind of further impacts the work. It's not something that I personally, it wasn't handed down to me from my mum. My mum couldn't sew anything. But I know that when I'm working with textiles, I am sort of part of what has been. Yeah.
Do you find yourself drawn to sort of deeper way of engaging with those processes? Or, I mean, first of all, if it wasn't handed down, how did you learn them?
Well, it's a good question. I did textiles GCSE, so that's like what you do before your A-level. So you're like 15, 16. I was smoking a lot of weed and I was truanting from school. You know what that means. And so I wanted to do art GCSE, but I thought that's probably too hard for me. So that's not going to fit into what I want to do, which is like really not show up. So I said textiles are easy, like whatever. So I would just sit at the back of the class, stoned with my cap down really low, and I would just embroider, and yeah, that's when I learned. How
Sorry about that. Well, that was my brain and my mouth kind of trying to... Anyway, so now are you interested in furthering a deeper understanding of embroidery, or do you feel you know enough embroidery and you just get on with the work?
I think that it's important. Well, first of all, I then when I started working with embroidery as an adult, I of course immerse myself in the work of artists like Louise Bourgeois and Kiki Smith and these incredible inspirations for me in my practice. I have had people say, you know, you're working really hard, though you might be going a bit mad. Have you thought about like getting someone in to do your embroidery? And I'm like, well, I don't think that would work because they'd probably be really good, I guess. And I think it's important that it's me, and I think it's important that you can see the phrase and the strings and the knots and the mess and the chaos, because I'm not a professional seamstress, I'm not a professional embroideress. And I think that that's important because then in the pieces you can see the toil, and the work is really about toil. Yeah. So to have someone brilliant and a master of it come in and do it, I think you'd lose that. Yeah.
I think that the whole idea of sort of raising the curtain and allowing the audience to see sort of some of the actual workings, perhaps it's seen as a mark of authenticity, but I think audiences are hungry for that in all different levels. Yeah. So I can imagine that there's an immediacy of somebody to see that idea of the hand of the artist as perhaps not the most skilled, but yeah. There's something about that connection. And something also about the fact that you're using textiles that have a previous history. There's like an aura to that would seem to me to be a kind of powerful package.
Yeah, I think there's a way, I think it's a way of sort of saying I was here, like I am here, and it's messy, and please enjoy kind of thing. Yeah, but I think it is about sort of putting ourselves even further into the work by allowing, and that was, you know, I only really started during the pandemic to depict forms. I didn't do it before because I was making all this work about the female form, but I was really looking at like what goes inside us, what comes out of us, what we sleep in, what we get married in, what's on our kitchen table. And I wasn't depicting people because I didn't feel like I wanted to contribute to the objectification of women in art, and I didn't think that I knew how to do it in a way that wouldn't contribute to that. And then of course, like the whole world shut down, and I was like alone, and I had my daughter was with me half the time, but like that's only half the time, and everyone fucking left and came and lived out here. And I was in Dumbo, and I missed people so much, and so I started to think about all the women in my life, and how when I think about it, like every single woman that I know is a survivor of something. Not all the same things, but they've all survived something, and yet they exult and they celebrate and they dance or they pray or, you know, they create, and I wanted them around me, so I started to embroider actual bodies for the first time, and I've been learning since then. Yeah.
So what is the relationship to the video piece to lockdown? I mean, it would seem to me if you're coming to an idea of representing the human form, and especially women, when did the video happen? Before or after you actually started embroidering portraits?
Kind of before, in that I got the idea for it, and the first thing I did, I wasn't supposed to be in it. I sent it as a sort of script, as it were, to Kush Jumbo, and I said I'm casting 3 women, and because I was all like felt all inadequate and shit, and I didn't want to put her on the spot. I just said, "Do you have any friends that you know?" Which is like also code way of being like, "Can you do this?" But I'm going to be really English and go around the houses. And so I said, "Do you have any friends who might?" And she said, "I'll do it." And then I said, "Oh, brilliant." And so then I went to Sienna Miller and I said, "Kush, OBE, Kush Jumbo, British actress, OBE, she's going to be in this video work that I'm doing. do you have any friends? And Sienna said, oh, I'll do it. And then I cast this third woman, a Chicago actress. And everyone was going to either be in New York or I was going to fly the woman from Chicago and we were going to shoot it. And then lockdown happened. And Kush and Sienna moved to London. And this woman in Chicago, I said, can I fly you to London and we can do it? And like, she never responded. She just ghosted, which is fine. Because that's like a tall order to ask someone to do that during lockdown. So of course we had to like push the shoot and all the things. And I went back to Sienna and I said, I'm actually really deadly serious. Do you have a friend who I can cast as this third woman? And she said, no, because it's you. And I said, no, I don't do that. I'm not an actor. I'm not like you people. And she was like, Zöe, we've all heard you do your impersonations at dinner. Like, and she was like, this is your story, and these are your words, and you're bringing us into the conversation, and like, let's make it a conversation. And she said, look, you can shoot yourself in it, and if you don't like it, you just edit yourself out and you reshoot another time. And so I really do thank her, because she pushed me way outside of my comfort zone. I haven't shown the video yet, but that is happening, and it's going to be in my first museum solo show in Dallas next year. Yeah.
You've talked about how your relationship and approach to your process and art in general changed after you had your daughter. And that just seems like a very germane point to this conversation. So I'd love you to elaborate on that, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the experience it has a lot to do with my past, actually. And so the experience of being pregnant and giving birth and becoming a mother, it was the first time that I'd ever been in control of anything. And I think that comes from, again, like the environment that I grew up in, the experiences that I'd already had with men. Like, I willingly had a baby with an amazing man who was like a thing, successful, older than me actor. And I was willingly the thing that supported the main thing. And I just like went along with that, and it suited me absolutely fine. And then I became pregnant, and this sort of power started to bubble up, and like I liked it. And when I gave birth, it was really hard, obviously, and I did it at home with no pain meds, and there's a whole placenta story, we won't go into that, but it was really hard, and also like completely amazing. And it was the most integrated I've ever felt. It was the most in touch with my instincts I've ever felt. And so in a way, the experience of becoming a mum opening me up to all these different disciplines and mediums, and me saying, I think maybe I have something to say, like I think maybe I need to do this, and then like I will do this actually. That was all because of how empowering that experience was for me. And so I don't think any of this would have happened. For me, personally, I don't think any of this would have happened if I hadn't had that kind of breaking open. Yeah.
How does your daughter feel about your work? Because she's now
12. Yeah.
So she's conscious. I mean, how does she feel about your work, and then also the process of making it?
Yeah, she's been super, I think she loves it, and I know that she really responds to it. I think the challenge so far has been, I've only recently moved somewhere where my studio is on a different floor. And so when I was living in this loft in Dumbo, I was making everything kind of like out in the open, and then she would get back from school and I would have to quickly tidy it away and hide it, and I didn't always tidy it away and hide it, and sometimes like I didn't want to. And I think that I can see now that has led to some conversations that were had in my home, where like basically Cleo would come home and be like, oh, that's a new piece. What does that say, Mum? Well, what's that about? Well, is that something that happened to you, Mum? And like I have a very like open policy with parenting, so I've always spoken to Cleo in a really like, yep, like I'm flawed and I've had a real life and things have been hard, and this is a piece about that. And now looking back, I'm like, it would have been better for Cleo if some of that had been concealed. That's just my honest observation at this point. However, I think Cleo's like I think pretty inspired by living around so much art and art in progress as well.
The other thing that I think is really interesting is that there seems to be a progression in what you have depicted and what you have talked about. We talked in the beginning of the conversation about victimhood and kind of survivorness.
Yeah.
It would feel like you are moving towards a place where perhaps you have transcended a lot of your experience, and that is coming out in your work. Yeah. That is a little fraught. I mean, it's always fraught when your life is so central to your work. How do you feel about that what would appear to be a very tender set of emotions, and perhaps a coming to consciousness about that?
Yeah, I think, well, you hit perfectly on the word tender, because the series that I've been working on for the past year is called Tended, and it wasn't that I consciously decided, all right, Zöe. So the series before that was called Blood Work, right? And it was really about like, we rave and we dance and we survive, and like there's all this shit that happens to us, and then look at us. And then I didn't consciously say, okay, Zöe, now you got to give them something else. But I just realized, like, I don't really want to sit in this space right now anymore. Like, I kind of, it was cathartic. I hope it was impactful to other people. Like, I'm kind of ready to let Blood Work be a series that happened and is now complete for now. And I just really wanted to look at these more quiet moments between women in my life, and these tender moments. Like, there isn't a picture of it up, but in my next show I did an embroidery from a photo that I took of a girlfriend of mine in the bath, and she was heartbroken, she wasn't eating and she wasn't sleeping, and she came over, and I was like, because I've been there, so girlfriends of mine have looked after me and put food in front of me when I've needed that, and I can now do that for them. And so I did an embroidery of her in that moment, and I think I'm more drawn right now to these quiet, more subtle ways that we take care and that we love each other. Yeah.
I would like to open it up for questions, but I have one more question before I do that, and you get to pick. And maybe you just combine them both. I would love you to talk about how the placenta came into your work, because it is something about the female experience which, it doesn't get much more female than those aspects of our body, and especially, the unprettiness of giving birth. And then I'd also love you to talk about, you've mentioned the upcoming show, but I'd love you to talk about what's coming next.
Yeah, thank you. So the placenta, so I already mentioned that I gave birth at home, and I went into labor 2 weeks early, and I didn't know why. You don't ask, why are you coming early? But I did it, and it was hard, and it was amazing. And then afterwards, you have to expel the placenta. And I had this home birth midwife who I was like, sort of like blissed out, breastfeeding teeny little baby Cleo. And this home birth midwife was examining the placenta, and she went, "Oh my God, sweetie." And she was like, this thing was like on its way out. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she was like, well, it's probably why you went into labor early, and it's really lucky that you did go into labor early, because placentas have a shelf life, and when they detach from the body, it instantly cuts off the oxygen supply to the baby, and this was about to detach. And I was like, so I almost had a stillbirth. And she was like, yeah, you didn't, but like you would have. And I was like, so I was growing this thing for 9 months alongside my baby. I had no idea. I knew it was like kind of important because people always talk about it in the scans. I really didn't know much about it at all. I was like, let me see the baby's face. I just want to see the nose. But we are Ashkenazis. But yeah, I was like, let me see that good Semitic nose. But I knew it was important. I didn't understand that it could take life away. And then so when I realized that my placenta was in this in-between state between life and death, I thought I really want to freeze that. I took a photo of it because that was my medium at the time, was photography. I put it in the freezer, got on with being a mum, but couldn't stop thinking about the fact that this is a bit depressing, but the fact that everything living dies, like guaranteed. My baby's gonna die one day. I'm gonna die. We're all gonna die one day. Holy shit. Like, that's so unfair. It's so beautiful and it's so human. And so I decided that I would send the placenta on dry ice to the Institute of Plastination in Germany, where they had it for 9 months and they turned it into plastic. And that was the main piece in my very first solo show, which Anne and Mel came to. And Anne wanted to buy it. Do you remember? You were like, how much for the placenta? And I was like, dude, it's like the only thing in the show that's not for sale. Please buy anything else. You can literally have anything else. But yeah, I still have it, and I'm gonna schlep it to Dallas Contemporary next year. Yes, so perfect segue into the plug section of the program. Okay, so I mentioned that I have my first museum solo show, which is going to be somewhat of a survey show looking at work that I've made over the years pertaining to abortions, miscarriages, and birth, and it's in Texas. Yeah, pray for me. Yeah, I might need like a bodyguard or something. So yeah, I'm gonna have to get back in the ring before that show. So that is September 2024. Currently this summer I have work in the church, Sag Harbor, and in Hong Kong at Massimo De Carlo in a group show, and some work going to the Broad, and then SF MoMA the following year. But what I really want you to all come to, please, is I have a solo show that opens September 5th in the city at Lyles and King. Yay! And I've been working so hard, and I know I say that every time, but I don't think I've ever worked as hard, and so I hope you'll come, please.
We'll make a group visit.
Thank you.
So, questions from the audience?
Oh, you're right, I didn't. So it's downtown Manhattan, the galleries Lyles and King, and they're like somewhere in the Lower East Side. I will remember. Thank you.
Any other questions?
You're really very wonderful on social media. And two of the things that you address on social media are the identities of being Black and identity of being Jewish. And I would think it's fair to say that both of those cultural histories connote a level of generational trauma. And I'm curious if that is something that you think about or have felt about in making your work.
Yeah, I think that that's a good question. It's a good question. There are I follow a lot of sites like Black and Jewish Identity and Ethiopian Jews and whatnot, and I think there really is an intersection and a history of course, slavery and oppression and hate. And so I think, anti-Semitism is a very classic form of racism, and it's not really spoken about as racism, and people have a hard time with it. And I think it's important as Jews to recognize our privilege, because there is privilege in that we don't experience that same kind of flavor of racism as our Black allies. But at the same time, it's different, and it's not going anywhere, and it's been around for, I think someone told me recently, I think it's 5,000 forever. forever. And in every single generation, like, they have actually tried to wipe us out, like, off the map. And I think people think about anti-Semitism as being something that is really happened during the Holocaust, which now most of America doesn't actually believe happened, which is but I think people think about it as this kind of Eastern European horrible point in time stain on history. But actually, like, even if you look at that point in history, there was like copycat pogroms happening all over the world, in the Middle East, in North Africa. Like, my Jewish lineage, I'm Jewish on both sides, and so on my mother's side, they were from Belarus, so like white-looking Jews. And then on my dad's side, they had it denied, or they changed their name, or what have you, but they were North African, Sephardic Jews. Yeah, and the interesting thing, learning more and more about anti-Semitism and the history of it, is just the world doesn't care what kind of Jew you are. Do you know what I mean? They don't care. They just don't like you. They feel very uncomfortable with us. But we're still here. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there was another question. Sam will bring you.
I do follow you on social media, and I'm a huge fan. I found you through Hank, actually. And saw your work at the parish during that group show some months
Last summer, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, who is this? Amazing. So I started following on social media, and you posted something. I almost messaged you, but I was like, I don't know.
You should all message me.
Really? Okay, cool. And being an Ashkenazi Jew myself.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. You posted something about the slap. You know what I'm talking about? And I was like, what?
The slap.
I'll let you talk. I'll let you.
You talk about.
Oh, okay. So Zoe posts that a story about when you came of age and you started menstruating, and you told your mother that she slapped you in the face. I was like, what is that? I've never heard of this. And I immediately called my mother, and I'm like, Mom, have you ever heard of this? And there's a name for it, and I can't remember what it is in Yiddish. And she's like, oh yeah, of course. When I came to Grandma, like at 11 years old, because she started really young, that I had my period, she open finger and whack across the face. I was
It's an amazing phenomenon.
And it's an amazing, and I'm really curious about like that relationship with women. It's like, in general, I mean, obviously, mother-daughter relationships are always complicated. That's a whole seminar. We know this. Yeah, anyway, so I'll let you speak to.
No, that's a brilliant. Thank you. So my mum. So I didn't get like the slap from my mum, but she told me about it. She actually wrote a play. She was a playwright and acted. Yeah. And she wrote a radio play for BBC Radio 4, and it was called The Slap, and it was about her experience of, she didn't know it was coming. She didn't know her period was coming. She didn't know the slap was coming. And she noticed that she was bleeding, and poor woman, she decided to get bleach and apply bleach to herself. And in this play, there's like in the script, it's like, it stings, I sob, it stings, I sob. Also, which is something that I embroider a lot, and for this you need thick bleach and euphemisms, because no one called it a period, it was called the unwellness. And like how thick bleach and euphemisms is so deeply rooted, I think, in the female experience of like violence and these things that happen, and it's like, no one, don't talk. Clean it up, didn't happen, like, right, hot wash and then she fell asleep, and she shared, so these were like East London, very poor Jews. She shared a room with her grandmother, and her grandma woke her up, boom, slapped her around the face. And she loved her grandma. Her grandma was the only person who was nice to her, and her grandma just slaps her around the face. And my mum cries, and then she says, may your babies be safe. And so my mum told me about this story as this horrible thing that happened. There was beauty in it, but it's fucked up and it's horrible how like we mark this moment in a woman's life with an act of violence and a blessing. It's like, what's happening here? So when I got my period for the first time, I told my mum, and I said, you're gonna have to slap me. And she was like, oh my God, may your babies be safe. But the interesting thing about making work about that is that about half of the Jewish women who came to see that show at Fort Gansevoort was like, oh yeah, I got the slap, and about half of them were like, no, what is this slap? So it's not all Jewish women, but it's the thing. Who else? Show of hands. Anyone else get slapped? Yeah. One. Did you, Armin? Is it? It's a muzzle top. It's like, I think it's, I was going to say, it's got to be akin to smashing the glass, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's also got to be biblical, like, you know, men toil the soil and women will bear children in pain. Yeah. And it's also like you take the pain for your children, obviously.
We do, and it's thankless. Thankless job. Yes. May your babies be safe and may you never experience pain such as this.
Are there other questions in the room? Well, yes. Tony, just wait.
Yay. I love you, Tony.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm so touched by all of your work, but particularly by the beauty of the way in which you work. And I didn't know if maybe you want to talk about finding that beauty within, like, there's so much strength in talking about things that are so difficult in this very beautiful way, like that you're embroidering so beautifully on these textiles about something so painful and serious, and I think it elevates it to a whole other level.
Thank you. I really am. I'm a huge fan of Tony's work and Alice, and I'm just so thank you. That means so much to me. I think that I feel like we weren't supposed to make beautiful work in the art world. Like, the art world didn't want it, and it was almost like a criticism. And I have heard from other people, like, I had an art advisor said to me, like, oh, I really wanted for this, I won't mention them, amazing, really cool, fucking incredible gallery in New York. She said, I really wanted them to represent you, and I showed them your work, and they went, it's a bit beautiful, though, isn't it? And she said, well, then you haven't read, you haven't even like zoomed in and read the text, and this, you know, with these doilies and so pretty, and they don't want us to make beautiful work because we're women, but like the men can make the beautiful work, but like we're not supposed to. We're supposed to be just like suffering perpetually, not enjoy sex, not enjoy clothing, not want to have fun, like have no life, own cats, and make work, which I do, and make work that's like ugly and like hard and I think that like I do like that work also, and I think there's some amazing female artists who are using, like, you know, I guess I'm thinking of Cindy Sherman's Disgust. I guess, I mean, I don't really, that work was hard, but I personally, because I'm talking about these difficult things that happen to us, I don't want it to be a one-sided depiction of the female experience, because I experience so much joy. Like, I wouldn't have it any other way, honestly. Like, I don't want to be a man. I really don't. And I guess the beauty is a way of showing people, like, yes, it's really hard, and there are these things that happen to us, and I wish that they didn't. But also, like, there's so much joy and yumminess and creativity and delight that also comes with this. And so the beauty is really important to me. So thank you for picking up on that, yes.
There's a question in the front.
You said your mother was a playwright.
Yes.
In what way have you ever considered that as a possibility? I mean, how do you relate to her being a playwright and your own abilities to be so theatrical?
Yeah, thank you. I think that her being this writer, and she was also like a Shakespeare fanatic, and she was an acting teacher as well. So I grew up around all of these actors actors, and everyone was talking about theatre and plays. And I used to accompany my mum to the theatre at age, like, from 3. It's where I saw my first penis, which was like, oh. I was way too young. I was sat on, like, because my mum used to basically make me sit on the stage because I was so tiny, and I saw a man strip off naked and jump into a bath in, like, some Chekhov play, and I was like, no! But that's really tangential, I'm sorry. But I think that I was just so drawn to, like, these stories and these narratives, and it was obviously this completely different art form, but it was about creative expression, and I think language has played such a huge role in my work as well, and that's totally because of my mom and her exposing me to these great writers and these poets and these playwrights, and her writing was really all about, like, everyday voices, like people, like just normal people in my mum's life. That's what she would write about. I did, but it was that thing of, like, when you grow up in it, you don't want to do it because you know that you'll be bad at it, and then everyone will be like, that's such a shame that she's so bad at that because she comes from this family of that. Yeah.
Lavon has a question. Lavon, Sam's just getting you the mic.
Just a comment on your beauty versus angst or trauma. Don't you think that using the beauty of your work invites more women in? At least when I've seen your work, I think people are drawn to it because it isn't contemporary art that's offensive.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have ginormous clits right there.
Right.
You know, you don't have that thing happening that I think people get drawn in, and then they end up relating to it. And I've seen them walking through your shows, like reading everything that I get blood out of. Women have been getting blood out of things from time immemorial.
Yeah.
You know, and people get really drawn and linger. And so while I understand the importance of drama in your work and the importance of the contrast, personally, I would encourage you to keep sharing the every man, the every woman aspect of your work through something that's beautiful and relatable. So I hate to see you lose that.
Thank you.
So,
I think that's a big part of it is also the tactile quality. Thank you, Tom. These are my real, like, they are in my corner all the time, sponging me down. No, they are such a, thank you so much, Lavon and Tom. I think, bless you. I think that the beauty is a way of drawing people in, and the textiles as well, because of course you want to touch textiles. They have that tactile quality, and then also the scale, because I mainly work in quite what is considered in the art world, like, very small scale actually, and I think that you sort of have to come close, and I am exploring, for me, a larger scale. And I don't necessarily love it. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how this show goes. I've never made embroideries as big as these ones. They're not giant, but they are sort of tablecloths. And it's the biggest, it's the largest embroideries I've made. And we'll see if they are more successful, or if they're than the smaller pieces, or if they work well together. So I really I'm excited to kind of experiment with it, and I welcome, you know, your guys' honest feedback on scale, because I think about it a lot. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Zöe.
Thank you so much. You're amazing.